The 1924 Olympics in Paris are best remembered for the film Chariots of Fire, where Britain's Howard Abrahams and Eric Liddell won gold medals in the 100 and 400 metres respectively. Yet, there is another British athlete who also made history at those games. And his achievement has never been equalled in the ensuing 100 years. British Army officer Philip Neame won a gold medal in the shooting. A veteran of the First World War, he'd also been awarded the Victoria Cross for valour in December 1914. And to date, he is the only person to ever hold both Britain's highest military honour for bravery and an Olympic gold medal. Captured in World War II, mauled by a tiger in India, and heralding from a famous brewing family in Kent, this is the remarkable story of Philip Neame VC. Philip Neame was born near Faversham in Kent in 1888. And if you're thinking, oh, isn't his name like the Kent brewers, Shepherd Neame? Well, you're spot on. The Neames actually bought into the long-established company in the 1800s. In fact, they still own it to this day. Educated at Cheltenham College, where he excelled at hockey and was also a member of the Rifle Corps, when he was 18, Neame entered Royal Military Academy Woolwich, the training school for Royal Artillery and Royal Engineer officers. Successfully passing out in 1908, he joined the Royal Engineers. By the outbreak of the First World War, young Neame found himself serving at Gibraltar with the regiment's 15th Field Company. The 15th were almost immediately recalled, along with other regiments on overseas postings, to join the 8th Division, supporting the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, on the Western Front. They landed on the 5th of November, just 3 months after hostilities had commenced. On the 19th of December, just days before the famous Christmas Day truce of 1914, he was leading a team of sappers in the Neuve Chapelle sector. The commanding officer of the West Yorkshire Regiment, which had just managed to capture some German trenches, requested that Neame and his men help strengthen them in case of a German counterattack. By the time Philip Neame reached the trench, he found that the Germans had already begun their attack, and it wasn't going well for the British defenders. Whilst the enemy were advancing, throwing grenades as they came, the defending men of the West Yorkshire Regiment found themselves in trouble. Deep trouble. In the early stages of the war, the British Army did not have adequate supplies of grenades, and so had resorted to making their own improvised bombs. These typically had a simple black powder or gun cotton charge, with a length of commercial safety fuse protruding from the top. That fuse was invariably a fuzzy match. Originally designed for use on railways, the fuzzy match was longer than commercial matches, and burned with a steady, almost torch-like flame for 10 to 15 seconds. And crucially, they were extremely difficult to extinguish even in strong wind or rain. Perfect for the fuse on an improvised grenade. You know, us Brits are really good at muddling through, aren't we? However, the men of the West Yorkshire Regiment found that their grenades did not contain any fuzzy matches. They were effectively useless. And all the while, the Germans were getting closer. Philip Neame, the Royal Engineer, decided on a highly risky Plan B. He decided to use normal commercial matches, the famous lucifers that Tommies used to light their fags instead. Shorter, less resilient, and with a burn time of just 3 to 5 seconds, it was extremely dangerous. And yet, despite that short fuse burn time and the unreliability of his lucifer matches, for the next 45 minutes Neame led the defence of the trench, revolver in hand, whilst lobbing his precarious bombs at the oncoming enemy. And all the while, the West Yorkshires were able to evacuate their wounded before falling back to British lines. For this act of valour, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, the 42nd of 628 awarded during the First World War. He was promoted to captain the next year. Serving on the Western Front throughout the war, including the Battle of the Somme, he ended up as a lieutenant colonel, was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, the DSO, to go alongside his VC, and was mentioned in dispatches 10 times. When the armistice was signed, he'd just turned 30. On the 11th of November 1920, exactly 2 years after the armistice was signed, The burial of the unknown warrior took place at Westminster Abbey. As the coffin was carried into the Abbey, it passed through a guard of honour comprising of 75 holders of the Victoria Cross. Commanded by New Zealander Bernard Freyberg, it included William Coltman, the most decorated other rank of the war, and Henry Tandy, whom Adolf Hitler later claimed had saved his life, and I've told both of their stories in the past. Also present was Philip Neame VC. Now, for many people, that would already be considered some life. But this, in many ways, is only just the beginning for Philip Neame. On the 5th of July 1924, a capacity crowd of 45,000, along with 3,000 athletes from 44 nations, gathered at the Stade de Colombe in Paris for the opening ceremony of the Games of the 8th Olympiad. Interestingly, and unlike later games, competitions were already in progress prior to this opening ceremony. In fact, Great Britain had already won their first gold. But more about that in a moment. Philip Neame was one of the 267 strong team from Great Britain. Competing in 115 events, they would secure 39 medals, including 9 golds. These Olympic Games in 1924 are immortalised in the film Chariots of Fire. With a great soundtrack from Vangelis, the film, with some artistic licence, tells the story of the rivalry between British runners Howard Abrahams and Eric Liddell, Liddell's refusal to run on the Sabbath, and then their Olympic triumphs. Abrahams won the 100-metre final on the 7th of July, with another Brit, Douglas Lowe, winning the 800 metres on the same day. And then 4 days later, Liddell claimed the 400-metre gold. But the very first British gold medal was won nearly a week earlier, before the opening ceremony had even taken place, in the shooting. The men's 100-metre team running deer double shots beat the Norwegians in a gripping finale that went right down to the wire. And one of the 4-man team was Victoria Cross recipient Philip Neame. The grandad of the team was 61-year-old Alan Whitty. Born in Worcestershire, he'd started his life as an apprentice blacksmith before joining the Royal Worcestershire Regiment 3 weeks before his 17th birthday. Eventually he was commissioned in 1900 and rose to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel during the First World War, where he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, the DSO, just like teammate Philip Neame. At 35, Neame was the next oldest in the team, 3 years ahead of Cyril Mackworth-Praed. Mackworth-Praed had served with the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards during the First World War, and he would serve again in that regiment in the Second World War, finishing up as a colonel. Alongside his team gold, he also won silver medals in both the individual running deer double shot and also the single shot too in these Olympics. Amazingly, he would represent Great Britain 30 years later, again in the shooting, at the 1952 Helsinki Olympics. The youngest member of the British team was Herbert Perry. 30 years of age and having served in the Royal Artillery during the Great War, it fell to Perry to shoot last. His team were lying in second place, ahead of Sweden, but 67 points behind the Norwegians. In his first round of 10 shots, he scored just 29 points. Surely gold was going to Norway. And then in his final round of shots, he scored 39. Total points, 68. He had just fired Great Britain to shooting gold by 1 point. The achievements of Neame and the rest of the shooting team have been pretty much overshadowed by the whole Chariots of Fire story. Britain didn't win another shooting gold for over 40 years. Philip Neame now had an Olympic gold medal to go alongside his Victoria Cross. He is the only person to have ever achieved this incredible feat. For the record, Great Britain won 9 golds at the Paris Olympics, including Lucy Morton becoming the first British woman to win an individual gold in a swimming event. Back to army life, Neame transferred to the Indian Army in 1925, joining the Bengal sappers and miners. He would spend the next 13 years serving on the subcontinent. It was whilst in India that, in 1933, he was mauled by a tiger whilst on a hunting expedition. Suffering from blood poisoning, he was sent to convalesce at a hospital at the hill station of Simla. Here he was nursed by Alberta Drew. Not for the first or last time, A nurse fell in love with her patient, or the other way round, and the following year they married. They would remain married until Neame's death 44 years later. In 1938, and promoted to the rank of Major General, he returned to the Royal Military Academy Woolwich, where his whole military career had started. This time, however, he was returning as Commandant. Interestingly, he would actually be the last Commandant of RMA Woolwich, as it was closed during the Second World War and afterwards became part of Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. Just over a year after he arrived back in Kent, Great Britain was at war once more with Germany. Within 24 hours of the declaration of war, Neame was appointed Deputy Chief of the General Staff for the British Expeditionary Force. And just like their fathers, the men of the BEF headed across the Channel to northwestern France. However, before the BEF faced the German blitzkrieg, Neame was moved to the Middle East theatre, where in February 1941 he was appointed General Officer Commanding in the eastern half of the Italian colony of Libya, which the British Commonwealth forces had successfully captured. Now an acting Lieutenant General, his command consisted principally of the British 2nd Armoured Division and the 9th Australian Division. However, with the Italians on the defensive, Hitler was forced to send German reinforcements to bolster his allies. Enter Erwin Rommel and the Afrika Korps. Just a month after Neame had taken command, Rommel struck. The German offensive threw his forces into disarray. Over 3,000 men from the 2nd Armoured Division were taken prisoner, whilst the 9th Australian Division desperately fell back on the port city of Tobruk, where they were besieged. The siege of Tobruk would last over 7 months, until the end of November 1941. By the time Tobruk was relieved, Philip Neame, however, was a prisoner of war. During Rommel's lightning advance, Neame had been travelling with Lieutenant General Sir Richard O'Connor when he suddenly drove straight into a German advance patrol. Surrounded and outgunned, Neame and O'Connor were taken prisoner. Along with Arthur Percival, who was captured at the fall of Singapore in early 1942, they were the most senior British Army officers captured in the Second World War. Neame was moved to a special POW camp specifically for prisoners with the rank of brigadier or above at a medieval castle just outside Florence in Italy. At any one time there were up to 24 prisoners held there. It was here that Neame met another highly colourful prisoner, Adrian Carton de Weert, another Victoria Cross holder. I've told the story of the one-armed, eye-patch-wearing de Weert in the past. An incredible bloke, so check it out afterwards. De Weert famously escaped through a tunnel dressed as an Italian peasant, with one arm and an eye patch. Maybe not surprisingly, he was swiftly spotted and recaptured. Neame himself didn't make a bid for freedom, but it was he, using his engineering experience, who had designed that tunnel, which ran from a disused chapel and ended outside the castle. 6 men were able to use it to escape, and whilst de Weert, who must have looked like he was in a pirate fancy dress, was soon rounded up, 2 of them, New Zealand Brigadiers James Hargest and Reginald Miles, managed to get all the way to neutral Switzerland. Meanwhile, the war was turning against the Axis forces. Montgomery's Desert Rats had defeated Rommel at the Battle of El Alamein, and with the US landings in Algeria during Operation Torch, the Germans and Italians were pushed out of North Africa. In July 1943, the Allies successfully landed on the island of Sicily, and then on the 3rd of September, they landed on the Italian mainland itself. That same day, the Italians signed an armistice with the Allies. Italy was now thrown into confusion as the Germans raced to take over and defend the peninsula against the advancing Allies. Confusion also reigned in the POW camps, as many Italian guards simply left their posts. It was in this confusion that on the 10th of September, Neame, along with O'Connor and Air Marshal Owen Boyd, the most senior British POW of the entire war, escaped. Avoiding German patrols, they made their way to a port on the Adriatic coast near Rimini and persuaded a fishing trawler to take them south. They arrived at the Allied-controlled town of Termoli and were swiftly taken to Bari to meet the Allied commanders General Alexander and Eisenhower. The 3 high-profile ex-prisoners were then flown to Tunis in North Africa, where they were interviewed by Winston Churchill, who just happened to be in the vicinity. Lieutenant General Philip Neame VC finally arrived back in Britain on Christmas Day 1943, landing at Prestwick Airport in Scotland. As a complete aside, it was at Prestwick Airport that on the 3rd of March 1960, Elvis Presley stopped off for a couple of hours whilst travelling to the USA from his national service in Germany. It was his only official visit to Britain. Anyway, back to Philip Neame. Even though the war still had a way to run, the Normandy landings wouldn't take place for another 6 months. Neame found himself at a loose end. Despite his bravery in World War I, and being mentioned twice in dispatches this time round, his capture during this war was a source of embarrassment. He was not given another command during the Second World War. Following the war, he was knighted in 1946 and served as Lieutenant Governor of Guernsey in the Channel Islands until 1953. He was also appointed Colonel Commandant of the Royal Engineers. Finally retiring to his native Kent, he died in April 1978, aged 89. He's buried at the Church of St Mary the Virgin in the village of Selling. He was survived by his wife Alberta, who died in 1994. His capture and incarceration during the Second World War put a blot on the military career of Philip Neame. However, it was an incredible career. Victoria Cross, DSO, mentioned in dispatches 10 times during the First World War and twice in the Second. A member of the Guard of Honour when the unknown warrior was taken into Westminster Abbey. Last Commandant of Royal Military Academy Woolwich. And whilst many might raise an eyebrow at the nature of his capture, even his incarceration in a medieval castle with some high-profile prisoners, designing a tunnel through which 2 brigadiers escaped to Switzerland, and his own escape evading the Germans would make an interesting story by itself. Oh, and for good measure, he survived being mauled by a tiger, married the nurse who cared for him, and his family owned the brewery that makes Spitfire bitter. And to cap it all, he won a gold medal at the 1924 Chariots of Fire Olympics. Sir Philip Neame remains the only man to hold both the Victoria Cross and an Olympic gold medal. You couldn't make it up, could you? History is often just as fantastic, if not better, than any novel. Now, if you enjoyed this story, why not check out my stories about Adrian Carton-de-Wiart VC, the soldier they couldn't kill, or William Coltman, Britain's most decorated other rank in the First World War. A big thanks to all my supporters, including Anthony, Anita and Brian, and details on how you can support me are in the description below. I'm Chris Green, the History Chap. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to sharing more stories from British history with you very soon.